Health is wealth, and expect the unexpected. Surely the two most apt truisms of these crazy days on all fronts. Both ring truer than usual for my guest, Catherine Foote. She's been a year in her post as head of Phoenix Insights. That's a new UK think tank on aging and longevity. It is a workplace milestone. Fate served up with the kind of surprise we can all do without. Catherine, how else could I start but saying, how are you? How's your recovery going?
Oh, Susan, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. It's the first thing to say about how I'm doing. Thank you. Really pleased to be speaking to you today. But yes, it's okay. Thank you. It's 6 weeks maybe now since I was on a day trip to Brighton. It was the Jubilee Bank Holiday weekend with my husband and two kids. And yeah, just in an instant, did nothing more than fall over on the street, but managed to smash up both my elbows, break both my forearms, and am now on a long journey, weeks of physio after some operations. I'm a bionic woman now. I have pins and plates and screws and wires in my arms, hidden here under these bandages behind great long sort of Frankenstein Halloween
Oh,
scars.
my word.
But I'm getting there, thank you.
I mean, you just stumbled over your feet, or was there a twig or
I was
cobblestones?
tripped. Yeah, yeah. It was just a trip. Yeah.
Just a trip, but to have that much damage. I mean, often you just fall forward and you think, oh, your wrists. I rollerblade. So I'm always thinking, do I have my protectors on, my wrist protectors? Because that's what happens. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's so odd that you got both. I
Yeah.
guess you do things not by halves.
I guess so. No, I just landed awkwardly on both my elbows. I had my thumbs were under the strap of my shoulder bag, and I didn't get them out. I didn't sort of see it coming. Didn't in that strange time where sometimes when you fall over, don't you think time slows and you sort of see it all happening? That didn't happen to me that time. Just suddenly, I was on the ground after a nasty sounding crunch. Yeah,
Jeepers. Excruciating pain, no doubt.
it was horrendous, and my poor husband had to cope with our two little girls for the while it took for me to eventually gather enough strength to make it into a taxi to get to the hospital. But it took a long time. It was about 90 minutes or so. I
90
spent
minutes.
sometimes lying down, vomiting, sitting up, shuffling around on the pavement. We were waiting for an ambulance, but the wait ended up just feeling like it was going to take too long. That was a strange experience, I
I mean,
must
it's
say.
just the
Lying
shock of
and
it all.
the
That
shock of it
that
all, trying to work out, had this sort of strange kind of meta conversation with Tony, my husband, about I'd like, I think I need to pass out. What? Do you know, isn't there that thing about how you shouldn't pass out? What if you've hit your head?
Oh my
Oh yeah, you're right. Maybe I shouldn't pass out.
goodness.
Okay, let's keep talking to you and let's
Let's
make sure
debate
you
this,
haven't.
honey. Yeah.
Yeah, very strange.
Word.
Very
And
strange.
so, and then immediately to hospital, and you had two operations, one on each forearm, or
I did. So after a night in A&E and all sorts of shenanigans, we got me back to a hospital in London where I live the next day, and then I was waiting on the orthopedic ward, and ultimately had some operations. Yes, on both elbows, and spent a few days there, and then came home. Made some friends while I was there with my buddies on the orthopedic ward. I think I was pretty much half the age, if not less, um, than my friends, my fellow patients on that ward. Typically, it was women in their 90s who'd fallen and broken their hips. One lady had broken her leg. Um, yeah,
so this ties rather neatly into your work. And you posted a photo of yourself lying back with your wrist all bandaged up on LinkedIn, and it was quite astonishing because then when you told the story, and then being you, as I know you, you flipped it to the upside of your experience, and you wrote a beautiful post talking about the lessons that you've drawn from this unfortunate turn of events. Start with those. Tell us about how it made you feel about homelessness.
gosh, well, goodness me. I mean, overall, I suppose my overarching feeling is that very strong sense that we, all of us, are only one moment from disaster, only one moment from a very different life to the life we think we've got and we think we're currently living, and we shouldn't be taking anything for granted. When I wrote about homelessness, it was because of the looks I got on the street in those 90 minutes from the many people who passed by. As you know, I vomited on myself. My hair was a mess. I was dusty, and my clothes were all over the place. And I was, head in my hands and clearly looking very pale and very unwell. And I'm absolutely certain that some of the looks that I got weren't just looks of concern or sort of blank confusion, but looks of active distaste.
Wow.
Like I was a substance abuser, somebody lesser, somebody to be walked past and to be ignored and not helped. And that was, yeah, quite an experience. A kind of mystery shopping, homelessness, and substance abuse there for a moment.
And even with your husband ministering to you, and I suppose had your children been shuffled away not to see their mom in such pain,
Yeah.
or yeah, just
Yeah, well, he was looking after the girls, so he was very sensibly taking them off on missions to sort of buy mummy a bit of chocolate or buy mummy a bottle of water or something, just so they didn't have to sit and look at me the whole time
wow.
while we were
But
waiting.
and again, I don't mean to poke holes at the NHS, but there's a real problem with ambulances as well. An ambulance was called, but it was 90 minutes until you were stuffed into a taxi.
It was in the end. It was. Yeah, yeah. I think clearly the pressure on the service is immense, and throughout my time there, in A&E was absolutely frantic. I was variously in a bay, and then in a corridor again for a bit, and then back in a bay, and then back in a corridor while they were trying to cope with their lack of capacity, which of course is then part of the problem. So you have ambulances queuing outside hospitals in the UK sometimes these days, waiting for the space inside. We're under huge pressure. I'm sure health systems around the world are at the moment, and the NHS is no different.
But it's I mean, again, upside, it's wonderful that you were able to see firsthand. You would have loved not to have this experience, but it opened your eyes to the reality
Oh my
of
goodness,
what's
yes. I mean,
happening in
I've
the
been
wards.
absolutely. I've been working in aging and longevity for some time now, and have worked with this concept of activities of daily living (ADLs) in the world of caring for people with mobility difficulties, particularly in later life. It's all about housing policy is so often in terms of housing for older people, about how can our houses become smarter and better and more effective. How can our social care and our community services get more effective at supporting people with their ADLs, their activities of daily living. And suddenly I couldn't do very many activities of daily living myself for quite some time. And yeah, that experience of being, totally and utterly reliant on other
Yeah.
people to get through the most basic physical tasks in every day takes an extraordinary amount of dignity away from you, an extraordinary amount of sense of self, of sense of control, of sense of humanity. It's tough, and I knew I was just doing it for a few days. So as I was thinking, when I got back home, of my wonderful husband, my kids, my mum, my mother-in-law, my neighbors, spending so much time helping me with everything. Even just to really get out of bed in the morning and get actually dressed and feel actually clean and actually presentable and actually fed, that would, take the best part of 45 minutes or an hour. And yet, so often, home care visits in social care in this country are, as a standard, about 15 minutes for people. What you could do, other than a quick wipe round the face and a few spoonfuls of something, and the tiniest chance to chat in that time, and how far that is from genuinely giving people a decent human level of dignity.
Yeah.
Really, yeah, my experiences really brought that home to me.
And with your immobility, suddenly you needed 24/7 care.
Yeah,
And at the most fundamental levels, to go to the loo, you said to get a straw,
yeah,
the healthcare assistants would have to come and give it to you, place it closer to your lips, or even to push your iPad to keep watching a
yeah,
series. I mean,
yeah,
it,
yeah.
it's unbelievable that all of your function can be taken away so quickly and completely.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. And so, yes, it really brought home to me both that experience on the pavement and then that experience in hospital, and then later at home too. Just how critical it is that we're able to organize ourselves as a society so that we really can support people when they find themselves in that situation. The look of absolutely palpable relief on so many of those healthcare professionals' faces when they all asked me nervously, so many of them did, "Do you have anyone at home? Do you tell me about your living situation?" And I was able to say, "I've got my husband, I've got my mum nearby, I've got my mother-in-law nearby,
Yeah.
I've got neighbors I know." And suddenly, this weight of concern was lifted, and I could see them thinking, "Okay, I don't need to fill that form in. Okay, I don't need to order that social care. Thank goodness, I can move on,
No,
move
and
on
so
to the
many
next
people of
day."
my age and older. I mean, you're 43. I say it almost in every podcast. I'm 64. And my situation would be much different. You know, I lost my husband. I don't have a current boyfriend. The position is open, of course. But, I don't have family around me. My family are in Cape Town. And I've got friends, but they live all across London, far away, 45 minutes minimum to get there. So it would be tough. And would I be in a position where I would need home care and those 15-minute snatch, grab, give you
Yeah,
some water and away they go?
yeah, indeed, indeed. Yeah. No, be careful out there, Susan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll just have to watch what shoes I wear. So then let's get on to the Phoenix Insights. I mean, because of course you've got all these takeaways and your eyes have been wide open now to the very real experience of when you're talking about the ADLs. And, when reality bites, it frames things up in a very different way, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does. I mean, I first became interested actually in aging and longevity with not an experience about myself personally, but back at university, I started volunteering. So I was about 19 or so, and I started volunteering in a local nursing home. And I was organising a music club every Sunday afternoon, getting these fantastic, to be professional, ultimately musicians, fellow students, to come every Sunday and perform for the residents. And I made friends with a few different people there. One lady who just floored me one day, age 19, when you just don't think about getting old. You don't imagine yourself getting old. You don't think about being old. When she said to me, she explained how she'd been living in that home for longer than she'd ever been living out of it, married with her husband, who had passed a long time ago, and that she was fine, but that she felt that she hadn't quite yet met a good friend in
Oh,
those more than 2 decades
two
that she'd
decades
been
in the same
living with.
home.
And
And
I was 19. I had this terribly sort of patronizing attitude towards her that I hope I've become a little bit more nuanced and subtle in my views since then. But at the time, I just remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, is this what we're doing with these longer lives that we supposedly have?" I was, you know, studying all sorts of different things at the time and learning about these great leaps forward in life expectancy that we've experienced thanks to, vaccination in the first place, focus on public health, sanitation, nutrition, universal education for children, all these things that had led to these leaps forward in our standards of living and life expectancy. And yet all we seemed to be doing was letting people spin these lives out, these longer lives out
so it
at
had
the
a
end
real
of their
impact
lives.
on you, her experience, and that
It
led you down
did.
the path. You ended up going to university and getting a bachelor's in history and then political science.
That's
In
right. That's right. And then I worked in a health charity, what became Cancer Research UK, for a while after that. But always very interested in issues around health and aging. I moved to a different think tank, a much more established think tank called the King's Fund in the UK, a health and social care think tank, and then on to a new charity that was being set up by the lottery, funded by the lottery, called the Centre for Aging Better. And after that, it was there when I first came across this large figure in the world of pensions, a guy called Andy Briggs, who at the time was running a big pensions and insurance company called Aviva,
Yeah.
and who was also the government business champion for older workers in the UK.
Yes, I've had the good fortune of interviewing him when I was doing some interviews for the Longevity Forum
Yeah.
with Prof. Andrew Scott and Jim Mellon. And I remembered meeting you in the corridors when I was there in person, tucked away with Lord Filkin because he was then the chair of the Centre for Aging Better. So you were the head of evidence, as I recall,
I
at the
was, I
time.
was. So I was the sort of think tanky bit of the Centre for Aging Better, absolutely, collating the research evidence, adding to it, trying to think about new ways to communicate it to the sorts of people that we were trying to influence, be that, employability professionals in local government, or, or the sort of central government permanent secretaries who we were trying to influence, to take that sort of more strategic view about an aging society and how we needed to be thinking differently.
Well, you've taken all that knowledge, all that experience with making strategy, plotting strategy, trying for change, bidding to make change at the policy level. Tell us about Phoenix Insights. It's your baby of little more than 1 year. What's the overall mission?
It is. So I'm just having the best time, Susan, in this new job. I really feel like all my Christmases came at once when I was offered it. It's sitting inside this enormous FTSE 100 company in the UK with 13 million or so customers, so a huge reach into the UK population, hundreds of billions of pounds of assets under its administration, and a real commitment to social purpose, to making a difference on issues that matter, headed by this man, Andy Briggs, who is absolutely passionate as I am, about longevity and our need to think differently and optimistically and radically about quite how the basic arithmetic of our lives no longer adds up. It is not possible for us to realistically, for many of us to realistically sustain 30-year traditional retirements from 40-year traditional careers. It just doesn't work.
Well, the math has been out of whack I set up the Big Middle 4 years ago when I was looking into that, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, something doesn't compute here in this picture. It's just all messed up. And demographers and people who are in the aging and longevity space have been sounding the alarm at volume, but we still see out there a general lack of preparedness for what's happening now, more 65-year-olds than 5-year-olds, and more of that to come. What are your biggest concerns around the aging population and the decline in birth rates and, overall, generally, the inaction and complacency that seems to be surrounding these matters?
Yeah, these are, we're living in a transition, aren't we? In this sort of grand next stage of our demographic transition, and we haven't woken up, as you say, to what needs to happen. I think, of course, with any big transition, there are the early adopters, there are the innovators, there are the people, just like you, Susan, who are banging the drum and who have been banging the drum, and the people who are listening and doing something about it in some places. But if I were to look overall, if I were to sort of score the UK out of 10, but to what extent has it responded effectively to longevity so far, I'd give it, I don't know, what would you give it? 2.5, maybe a 3 tops. We've done some things. Auto enrollment is a huge endeavor to enable millions more people to be regularly saving into their pensions, and recognizing this sort of fundamental human truth that it is very hard to engage people in the long term. And so you have to reset your defaults, you have to reset your nudges so that it's easy and automatic.
Auto enrollment is great if you're on a full-time job with benefits, but if you're a gig worker,
Exactly.
In my sector, I was freelance. I chose to be self-employed. And when I was working at the BBC, I was made to be self-employed. I was told you have to set up your own company, cha-cha, all of that. It's the way certain industries are made, and the government just turns a blind eye to it, and the unions have been crushed. So it's up to civil society and think tanks like yours to really start beating the drum for the infrastructural changes that we need.
Yes, exactly. And I think, what for me is so exciting about the sort of unique proposition that I've got here at Phoenix Insights is 2 things really in particular. The first is that it sits inside this huge company. So I've spent my career in think tanks and in charities being that person that knocks on the door of companies like Phoenix and waves a little report and says, "Excuse me, would you mind caring about my important social issue, please? Would you mind, would you be interested?" And there's a different feel to a conversation when you're actually a colleague with people in these companies, when you're inside the tent instead of outside. So I've got huge hope that we will be able to work with different parts of the business. Phoenix is an employer, 8,000 or so staff, and it's got some fantastic commitment to it being a fantastic employer for people throughout these potentially much longer working lives, for people over 50, for people, into their 60s and 70s. But as a provider of products and services, financial products and services, as well, what it can be doing to better engage people in their finances, and as I said, as an investor, these billions of pounds that it is interested in investing for social impact.
So you want to be the think tank that shows how it's done first within Phoenix, the
Exactly.
Phoenix group, and then to have a template that you can trot around the rest of the UK and the world.
There aren't many think tanks that have a kind of ready-made do tank attached, and this great big, Goliath do tank that I've got attached, this huge company. So that really excites me. But the other thing about Phoenix Insights that I feel gives it some real potential is that we've set it up to be as interested in talking to, Westminster, Whitehall, the mayoral authorities, the policymakers, as real people. So a complete focus alongside your sort of classic think tankery that focuses on policymakers and decision makers and other big businesses.
Yeah.
On public engagement, broad public engagement, because I don't know about you, I feel like maybe the high watermark in my career for the closest we ever got to really strategic commitments around aging and longevity from government was probably around 2017 or so, when we had that industrial strategy. We had the grand challenge on aging and some real potential for a moment, but it died a death.
Brexit, as with all things, the food strategy, the strategy against obesity. I mean, how many food policies have we had?
Exactly.
27, I think, it's absolutely ridiculous. These things have a lot of fanfare and everybody gets around them, but I'm like you, I'm very impatient for change. And I realize it takes ages to change policy, but it just seems that, and of course, on a day, this is the day when, well, Boris Johnson is sort of resigning under enormous pressure as Prime Minister. So we're at another stage of tumult. And maybe what we need is a Minister of the Future to be appointed, taking a leaf out of Norway's book. Maybe that would be one thing that we could all agitate for, all of us who are demanding change in this space.
And Wales, of course, Susan. Wales has these wonderful two commissioners. Helena Hertklot's the Commissioner for Older People, but her companion, the Commissioner for Future Generations, I think Wales too is an interesting model. But no, I completely agree with you. And so the reason I think for me that focus that Phoenix Insights is going to have on broad public engagement is so important is because we have, singularly failed to make these issues of broad public interest and public attention for now. They are not the things that politicians hear about on the doorstep. There is no clamour for change from the general public, not really.
Well, unless you are a victim of ageism being shoved out of your workplace, you're living in survivalist mode, it doesn't really touch people in the same way. And everyone's so used to old people being the butt of crass jokes and the embedded internal ageism. Oh, I feel so old today. We have to tackle that. And yet, when people are fighting now with the cost of living crisis to actually put food on the table and to pay their bills, you understand the myopia of when it comes to action by governments and by society in general and Joe and Jill down the block.
Absolutely. You'll remember, I'm sure, those early days of the pandemic when people were, I understood it. People were trying to encourage, I think, social distancing behaviors from younger people who were finding it much harder to do. And you've got public health professionals and other people speaking in the media coming out with things like, it's not just older people that die from COVID. It's not just older people.
Yeah.
And of course, the implicit message there being, because if it were just older people, we wouldn't be so bothered.
Yeah.
The way that pandemic just shone this ugly light back on just quite how deeply ingrained ageism persists in all of us and in society was pretty horrifying for those of us in this world. I think wasn't it? And I'm sure has redoubled many of our efforts, you know, to bang that drum. I often have. It's extraordinary, isn't it? How age discrimination is technically illegal in this country. You know, we passed the Equality Act. It is illegal to discriminate on the grounds of age, and yet you hear it absolutely every day and every week, don't you? I
Well,
sometimes
I've
think about,
been
I don't know, do you ever compare age with some of these other protected characteristics? I sometimes think about, you know, could you get away with, you know, that thing about feminism, you know, flip a statement about a woman around to make it about a man. And if it sounds ridiculous, you found yourself some misogyny. You know, you can do that with ageism, can't you? And you can sort of
absolutely.
flip a statement that's so commonly used about age into something else, like into you know, into something like sexual orientation. So you could say, just like, you know, imagine how commonly we say to each other, oh, you know, you don't look your age. Congratulations, you know, good on you. Imagine saying the equivalent to a gay person. You know, oh, good on you. You look really straight today. I'm impressed.
Yeah, you're so
What's the
hetero
secret?
today.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. No, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, the depth and persistence of our ageism in society is a really major part of the reason why we have systemically failed to respond adequately to aging and longevity to date.
No, absolutely. And I just want, as a personal aside, because of course the big middle is my podcast, and I just want to put my hand in. I feel, just to share with you, I feel like I'm experiencing deja vu because my job disappeared. I wasn't a victim of ageism. My job disappeared when I was 56. So what, 10 years ago almost. And I remember after I did a course for a year and did some other things, started media training, teaching. Anyway, long story short, I experienced ageism because I kept applying to all of these jobs and I wasn't getting anything back. I was only invited to a couple of interviews. And then at one big media outlet, mainstream media outlet, I was told by, I think she must have been 23, 24 at on the outside, that, oh, but you've been out of the game for more than a year. And I thought, yeah, and I've got 40 years experience for you. So why wouldn't you be interested? She go, oh, well, we're interested in people who are working in the media now, who are actually on camera or on the radio. And I just thought, oh man, I've been on the radio since before you were born, darling. And I didn't say that, of course, but now I've just been running a small experiment. I put an open to work badge on my LinkedIn profile about a month ago, and I have applied for, I've got them on a little spreadsheet, 26 positions. And all I've had is rejection letters. And these are for things that are very peripheral, not in newsrooms, but peripheral communications roles that I could do. And nothing back. And I've made sure that, I tick the 60 to 64 box. So they know I'm not an ingenue. But it's again, nothing's changed. So, where do people like me go? There's a lot of rhetoric around, oh, we're looking for, it's a tight labor market. We've got to change the landscape. Where are all the hidden, talented people? Well, we're all there, but we're not getting past the gate.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Phoenix is taking part in a trial being run by the Centre for Aging Better at the moment on methods for trying to reduce and ultimately eliminate age bias in recruitment. Well, I think what you say about prejudice against gaps in the CV is rife, isn't it?
Yeah,
Absolutely
but
rife.
1 year off to take a course, and that's misperceived as a gap.
Yeah,
What about
absolutely.
lifelong learning? You're going to learn a new set of skills, something that interests you, and that's held against you. I mean, it's just the mind shift, the mindset, the behavioral side of everything that we need to tackle. And I suppose you're well placed now to be continuing that work that you began at Cancer Research and the Centre for Aging Better.
I hope so. Absolutely, absolutely. But no, I completely agree with you. And trying to sort of tell that message that it is only um, the businesses that are actively encouraging and actively bringing older workers back in and managing to retain them with the sorts of jobs that will work, that are going to be successful in the decades ahead. It is absolutely critical to business that they wake up to the basic economic necessity of enabling older workers to thrive in their companies, and to come not just through the door when they apply, but to apply in the first place. So how you advertise your jobs, I think, is also important, as is the recruitment process. And then critically is, how do you look after those workers when they're in post? And I think, really critical to that is policies around supporting flexible working, supporting people with caring responsibilities, with health conditions. And these are employment practices that will benefit people of all ages, particularly women, of course, at younger ages, just as much as they will older workers. So I'm optimistic.
But have you seen any, bright lights, any corporates that are leading the way on this? Have you seen that there's momentum? It's not just around the fringes, one or two companies having these, redeploy over 50s projects within the business.
Yeah, I mean, the day when we can, when your average journalist can name somebody other than B&Q or Timpson's or something in answering that question, that's when we know we've really made some progress. I mean, I do think I wouldn't be at a company like Phoenix if I didn't think that it was trying to lead the way. I think it's got some fantastic commitments and some fantastic successes. But no, we're a long way from a tipping point, aren't we? Absolutely.
Do you have a 5-year plan in terms of strategy, things that you can, impact goals that you can tick off a list?
Gosh, 5 years? I don't know. I mean, I'm still in startup mode in lots of ways. And I think, when you work, when you're trying to establish a think tank and you're trying to sort of, move these oil tankers of public policy and public perception, an agile approach that enables you to kind of bend with the wind and take opportunities when they arise, when it looks like, an issue is getting momentum, is really critical. But fundamentally, my priorities certainly for the next little while, and probably for the next few years, are around money, work, and skills. So I think it is extraordinary that it's not the national crisis that it should be. That most of us are not saving enough to live a standard of living that we would want in retirement. The future for most of us financially is not at all rosy. I feel like we're living in a bit of a bubble where so many people are able to say, using averages, of course, and only averages, which aren't that helpful, that older generations are relatively well off, because fundamentally that's actually, of course, about wealth and about housing assets, and so is only relevant to a certain proportion of that older population. But that bubble's popping. 28-30% of us think we're going to be renting forever in the adult population in this country, and our state pension system is totally predicated on the idea that you won't have any housing costs in later life. That's not the country we are becoming. So saving is critical, I think, and not just saving, but how you can provide a safety net for people in terms of social security, the future of the state pension, so that we, even for those of us that aren't able to save, we're safe.
Yeah, and so many people. I mean, I don't have, you must probably know from being the director of evidence at the Centre for Aging Better what the statistic is on that, because employment is so precarious these days for a big wedge of the populace. So they're never mind saving, they're just trying to pay their bills and get by to live another day of their short, miserable lives, really.
Exactly. So
to find some joy, and that's hard enough to come by. Never mind doing the savings, which is the ideal scenario.
Exactly. So the social security safety net, I think, is critical. But so too, just as you say, Susan, is work and employment, and what we can do to support people in parts of the country where we are still experiencing high rates of unemployment, huge rates of economic activity, to get back into the labour market, to progress through low pay. And for me, critical in that is the agenda around skills and lifelong learning. Trends in adult education, participation in skills and lifelong learning are going in exactly the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to break down this 3-stage life, if we're really going to diffuse our education, our work, our leisure in these much more exciting, much more flexible ways that are much more appropriate to longer lives, then at the moment we don't have an education sector, we don't have a further education sector, we don't have an employment sector that genuinely enables us to train and reskill, to switch careers, to take that course, to become that other thing that we've always wanted to become, later in life. So I think that combination for me of money, work, and skills is absolutely central to my focus for now.
I mean, wouldn't it be fantastic if we had a Japanese style commission set up to examine restructuring society for a 100-year life? I mean, that's something tangible that we could do if, and we're talking on a day when there is really no government, Whitehall's empty. But when we're looking into the near future, it would just be ideal. It just seems like nobody's grasping the nettle around the full panoramic picture of demographic upheaval.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I flit around myself personally, Susan, about whether national government is actually the answer here or what part national government should play. I think there are some statutory rights that we need to be looking at and we need to be expanding. I think we need to be accelerating some things like auto enrollment with national policy. But I'm actually, I'm excited about some of the city regions in the UK and what they're doing. The Andy Burnhams, the Andy Streets. I think, local devolution has an incredibly exciting agenda for responding to longevity because these combinations of issues about the labour market, about the skilled sector, about the age structure of a population, they're actually quite localised. They're quite different in different parts of this country. We're not one Britain when it comes to demographic change or local economies and job and labour markets.
But
And
doesn't
so,
central funding have a role in that? Because it can be a very fragmented effort then. Everybody's got their little silo, and then the funding gets pulled for that, and it dies a death. Something that would have been a great
yeah.
initiative with a local council or civic authority.
Funding, of course, is critical. It is critical. But, my experience of working in the think tank sector is everybody needs to try these things for themselves and own the solution for themselves. You can't go around selling even the solution that works 30 miles down the road to another place and expect them to doff their cap and say gratefully, thank you, we'll copy that then. Because everywhere's different and everyone needs to own their own answer. So I think funding's absolutely critical and the right policy infrastructure is actually absolutely critical. But gosh, as you say, there's no chance of the real leadership and the real drive coming from central government anytime soon, is there? So for me, let's look somewhere else. Let's look locally. Let's look to the private sector. Let's look to social enterprises and the voluntary sector. And actually, the social enterprise sector is flourishing in this world. There are more exciting new community interest companies, social enterprises, independent businesses than you can shake a stick at, don't you think, over the last few years? In this
Yes,
space, trying to
absolutely.
support people with midlife reinvention, with thinking about their careers. It's a complicated market to navigate. I think if you're a potential customer, to know what you're buying from some of these different organisations. But I think you look at the likes of organisations like Brave Starts. You look at some of the people that took part in the International Longevity Centre's Work for Tomorrow competition a few months or even maybe a year ago. It was now Maturious, 55 Redefined. There's a real explosion of innovation there, actually. So perhaps let's take our eyes off number 10 and let them get on with it for a while.
I mean,
And
Restless
let's
UK
look a
is
bit more locally.
Restless UK, the organization run by Stuart Lewis. They're one of my media partners, and they're doing some great things too. But again, it's joining up all the dots of all of these organizations because as someone who is 60, that's my name and my age, 64, and underemployed, I'm not busy enough with the comms courses I teach. I would love to be more gainfully employed, doing any number of things. I've had leadership roles. This is sounding like a job advert, but it's accessing these programs and the whole onboarding process can take a very long time, and you never get the sense that there's a real position at the end of it. There's sort of talk around the edges, and you could reskill and do something that is, quite frankly, something you do with your eyes closed and your hands tied behind your back. So I guess what I'm hearing when I'm talking to other people who are in the same position, a lot of them are members of the Restless community, is there's just not enough recognition that access remains a barrier for people who are out there chomping at the bit to do something meaningful and make their contribution to society, and they're just not finding a way in.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure that's very true. I'm sure that's very true. And but as I say, very different in different places, and different in different industries. I think too. Certainly, the government at the moment has been thinking about this idea of the midlife MOT, has been for a few years, and it just recently announced that it's planning to roll out a version of the midlife MOT delivered through job centres. But if you have actually been employed throughout your life and find yourself no longer working, and you've never been to a job centre before, do you think of the local job centre as a place that is going to give you access to the sorts of work that you want and the sort of future that you want? If that's never been a world you've been in, if that's never been a place you've been, if that's always been a place you've seen on the high street and walked past, I'm not so sure. So I think you're absolutely right that thinking about where people are and how to reach them is the perennial problem of all social policy, trying to do something about working age adults, where everyone always jumps to, well, the employer or the GP. That's why we have the explosion of interest in things like social prescribing, because how do you reach people? How do you reach working age adults? Where are the institutions? Where do you find them? So I think those issues of access are critical. I agree.
You were very positive about Andy Burnham in Manchester. What's he doing right that you'd like to see replicated?
Well, I think, he's in the fortunate position of having things like, devolved control over multiple different budgets. And I think a bit like you're describing for the people that you're talking to, and maybe even to some extent for yourself, Susan, what's so often lacking in the offer from public services in areas like housing, social care, health, employability, skills and training, is that they're not integrated, is that they're not coordinated, and they don't work around people as individuals. So, programs like They're Working Well agenda, there are many other examples in health and social care, that what they're doing around physical activity too. I think these opportunities of integrating multiple different public services around individuals' needs, meeting people where they are and solving the problems in their whole lives in a coordinated way, has got to be the future of public services. And it's large combined authorities with devolved powers like Greater Manchester that are at the vanguard of that, because they have those powers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Catherine, final question. What will that final question be? I'm just thinking, in a year, what is success going to look like for Phoenix? What will you have done? I know that's a really short time frame, but what's next on your list of goals?
Right.
Really?
Well, I mean, realistically, in a year, I will hope that more people will have heard that Phoenix Insights is a big pensions company who is interested in longevity and committed to doing something about it. That we've broken out a little bit of the absolutely delightful but sometimes cozy longevity bubble that's ever growing, but still often a bubble, and begun to just stretch our fingers of influence into the decision makers and policy makers who have yet to see aging and longevity as their business, and that we've begun in our work with the public through deliberative activities that we're doing, setting up some lovely deliberative events around the state pension age this year, doing some big sort of advertising and brand building activity around longevity, just begin to have prompted a few thousand, a few tens of thousands, a few 100,000 more conversations in a few more living rooms about how people themselves want to address this in their own lives and for people that they love. Not something we'll be able to measure, but I guess that's what I hope for.
Well, I think amplifying the messaging and getting that conversation going, it'll go a long way to puncturing that bubble. So I thank you so much, Catherine Foote. Catherine is the director of Phoenix Insights. That's an aging and longevity think tank, brand new here in the UK. Well, it's just celebrated its first birthday, so that's new by any measure. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Susan. It's been a pleasure.
And a rare reminder from me, please, pretty please, to help me grow the show by heading to Apple Podcasts and or YouTube, depending on if you're watching this or listening to it. And please write a sparkler of a review. I don't often solicit these reviews, but algorithms and all that, I really appreciate when you get in touch by email, as so many of you do, and I am so appreciative of your messaging. But I would love you to hit Apple Podcasts and build up those reviews, because everything is driven for audience growth by the algorithms, as we know. Anyway, big love for all of your messages, and can't thank you enough. Bye bye, Catherine.
Bye, Susan. All the best.